Hey, welcome back to part 2 of our discussion around FireEye's compromise. There's been a lot of developments that have come out since our last episode was recorded, including the manner in which FireEye was actually compromised to begin with. So we're going to be discussing some of those updates today, but also we're going to be discussing how a supply chain attack really affected this incident. So before we get into the discussion, I want to go ahead and reintroduce everyone that we have on the call today. Today, I am joined by VerSprite's CEO, Tony UV. We've got Paul Miller, who's the director of our threat intelligence group. And we've also got our senior threat intelligence consultant, Bethany Keele. So I know that this is a little bit lagged from the last time that we recorded an episode. There was a lot of information coming out, and we really wanted to take in everything that was being put out there to the public. It seems like every day a new company or a new government agency was really talking about how they were affected by this, and we wanted to really learn more information before we do another video. So last time we talked heavily about the motivations and FireEye specifically. Today we're going to be talking about supply chain attacks and how that really started this entire conversation that we've having. I'm going to go ahead and give it over to Tony so that he can start talking to us about some of the updates we've learned since our last talk, and also talk about our supply chain conversation started.
Absolutely. Thanks, April. So yeah, the last time we basically talked was really around the centerpiece of what was known. And this was just maybe a day or two after the disclosure that FireEye got compromised. Of course, during the talk that we had as a roundtable, we basically talked about how we knew that there was going to be more details that were going to be forthcoming. We knew that there was going to be more information about how things happen, with them. And sure enough, almost immediately after we had our conversation, we found out about Sunburst. And so we fast forward to today. I kind of want to set the table on a couple different topics, and it's great to have Paul and Bethany here from the threat intel standpoint. On the defensive side, I'll talk more about some of the enterprise security, that types of things related to supply chain, obviously supply chain considerations, which is something that we had spoken about as we address geopolitical risk themes about invading the supply chain in order to get to target organizations. We'll also talk about mitigation strategies that are failing. Some of the details related to the SolarWinds fails that provides a learning moment for those types of organizations, and also for the organizations that are actually employing those types of products. So going back to supply chain, obviously the way into many organizations is really through different types of technologies. Hackers and criminals are really not going through the front door or even the back door anymore. They're looking for the Trojan horse in, and that is going to be related to what types of technology, software, hardware, services are embedded with those types of companies. So that's what we mean by supply chain attack, just to kind of level set on that. And building off of that, though there really isn't a lot of companies that are prepared to address supply chain security for the most part. As a former CISO in various different types of companies and having worked on the enterprise, there isn't really security activities that really lend to the level of inspection on both software configuration, services, personnel management that provides that level of assurance. If we look at, as an example, some of the traditional things that were done to look at vendor software that you buy today, you do vendor risk assessments or product security assessments. And they're just ill-equipped to look at the nature of the details of what we've learned with the Orion product, how it was shipped out, how it was basically, suggested to be configured, where it even said, hey, make sure you deactivate your antivirus, your anti-malware types of solutions in order to whitelist these types of products that we have. This really introduces the notion of you can trust our product. And what that's done in the industry for over, a decade is basically, really condition a lot of security professionals to be like, yeah, I just bought this from a major iconic technology security company. Surely they're not going to fail. Now, at VerSprite, obviously, we do a lot of threat modeling, and there has to be consideration for implicit trust. And I think that's the evolution from this, right? Is to really understand, what does implicit trust of products, services, software, hardware mean as I'm plugging it into my network, as I'm plugging it into and integrating it into my software, integrating it into my different products? And I think we'll touch upon that a little bit more. But I think we can touch upon this theme and maybe some of the more details on Sunburst. I'll turn it over to Paul for some of his opening thoughts, and Bethany as well.
It's been an exciting week and a half or so. We've had a lot of information come in about this thing. There's still a lot of information being disclosed on a daily basis. I want to be clear, attribution is hard, as they say. And while there are indicators that this can be attributed to a particular nation state actor, everyone in the industry is stopping before they say who did it. So we're not going to attribute it to anyone just yet either. Because of that, we're going to go forward talking strictly about what we know here and what we've learned. There appears to be a potential second threat actor and a second piece of malware that's come up in the past few days that wasn't actually put there by the nation state actor. And that's an interesting turn of events, but there's very little detail about that yet. There is indicators that there was a VMware vulnerability that was exploited in order to make this happen in the first place through their access and identity manager tools. So that's an interesting one as well that plays into how complex this attack may have really been, that it didn't just exploit, as some of us have seen, a password on a server facing the internet somewhere that was weak. In truth, there were more parts to this than I think we will know for some time. The U.S. Treasury announced today they still have not been able to determine what data was exfiltrated. So we're a week and a half in, and they don't actually have an accurate picture of what was done. And I think that's pretty typical of an attack this size. It's very hard to scope what was done when they had that long of a time period to be exfiltrating data or establishing persistence. It's going to be very difficult to dig them out of some of these networks. Beyond that, there is a list of customers out there that has been it has been correlated to a list of compromised domains that have been discovered, and so there is a script that's been released on GitHub to take that list of domains and basically reverse DNS them to the domain names of the targets of companies that were attacked actively in this. So that's been an interesting one as well. We've got a lot of IOCs that have come around, so a lot of indicators of compromise are available. They really come down to the way to break this is blocking any callouts to the affected known bad DNS entries in that list. There has been a SolarWinds patch released, which removes the vulnerability, and really beyond that, a lot of work digging through network logs, historical network logs of the recent past to figure out if there's been any callouts to any of those known IOC domains. And that's kind of where I am with it right now.
So I think it was really interesting that you had mentioned implicit trust right at the start, because how this originally came out to be was they had published an update between March and June. And the update that we saw is what led to the backdoor and the vulnerability there. So we have this software that we trust, and we are told that we need to update this product. So we go in there, we trust them, we update this product, and we've just introduced this vulnerability into our environment. So it was said that about 18,000 other platforms had installed this update and are vulnerable to this, but only something like 50 to 60 companies were actually impacted by this vulnerability. So again, it just goes back to implicit trust and the fact that we have this company that we trust with this solution. We went in, we updated it, and it really puts it in a very interesting point of view, because you can't really go back to the common security tips that you usually give for these kind of events, which are patch your systems, because in this case they did patch their systems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, this type of this type of supply chain hack that happens actually to update servers has actually happened in the past. With other types of companies. ASUS was affected. The hardware manufacturer of endpoints actually had an update server that was compromised. Linux Mint, the source files for Linux Mint distro, was actually compromised years ago. So we're not looking at something like it's a new threat pattern. It's complicated to take over those types of environments, and there's a lot of operational security intelligence that adversarial groups need to find out about how to infiltrate those types of environments. And so, let me go ahead and just play the threat model card. Most people right now in the major enterprises, and there's a big list of enterprises that were affected. I think that list was actually taken down. But as many of those companies are reeling and trying to see, are we affected? Are we still affected? What other types of residual level risk may have further been compounded by the fact that we were running SolarWinds products within our environment, and we did have that implicit trust to Active Directory controllers, multiple different servers, and other types of services. Organizations are going to have to think about that as they go through the remediation phase. And like Paul mentioned, looking at what egress traffic is going out. One thing is to simply, obviously look at the blacklisted, domains that are basically known to basically have, bad, to be associated with, bad actors, or have bad domains where, there's malicious traffic that are leaving these types of organizations, and maybe where there's been compromises, IOCs that have been found. But the other is really kind of taking a step back and looking at things more architecturally, and looking at not just SolarWinds, but as we learn from this as a security community, what types of implicit trust do I have for other products? I mean, this is a timely event to learn from and think, defensively in a more strategic fashion, and say, what are some of my other implicit trusts? How can I basically tabletop a Sunburst Part 2, Part 3, Part 4 with some of the more integrated services that I have, right? With other types of pieces of software, and I think that's the major question that many organizations have today. I think that the zero trust concept needs to evolve faster. It's been talked about for a long time. The zero trust model is you don't trust any call out input parameter from an extraneous source that's on your network, even though it may have been authored by your development team, an offshore development team, by a third-party product or software. You want to be able to qualify, and so there's that qualification. Is going to take some time. Now, where to apply that level of qualification programmatically through regex, through different types of like customized signature sets, should be based upon a risk-based approach in a threat model. What is most likely, depending upon what is interconnected to so many services that are critical to an organization. I think that is an important effort and endeavor that many companies will want to will want to explore. I don't think we've seen the last of this at all. I highly suggest that many of those out there that are listening, Google threat model, organizational threat models, and VerSprite, and click on the video feed, because there's a lot of organizational threat models that we've built that specifically talks about supply chain hacks. We've done presentations, through different, places like OWASP and beyond, that speaks about that. So I think that should definitely be in the 2021 agenda for those companies, looking into the new year.
I think you're right, and that this isn't the end of it. I think this is just the very beginning. They had access into these systems, and you don't just report that there was a hack or a breach. Now you have someone inside of your systems, and they could have used it for privilege escalations throughout the system. So we don't really know what's happening inside of these environments yet. So taking a threat model based approach to this, I think, is the best way to remediate this incident.
Absolutely. I also think we've got a segment of the market here that has been largely ignored in many ways for security practice, and that's configuration management and EDR vendors, right? That type of thing, where you have command and control centralized for an organization. I mean, when you look at historically how this has been abused in the past, there was so little security on this, say in the late 90s, early 2000s, on these models that, hacking tools explicitly targeted remote access and being able to do these configurations, management changes. And ironically, those things became the tools that the enterprise used over the next few years after that, right? Because it was better than what they had, the tool set they already had. So in this case, I think there is a target here who are security savvy, but probably need to put some time in really really securing their networks and watching what's going on right now, because this is not the last one. We're going to see several other vendors that are in the same space attempt to get popped because this was incredibly successful. And so, speaking from the criminal mindset, that worked really well. I need to find someplace else I can do this again, right? And hopefully make a big win for them is what they're thinking. So those same organizations need to really step back and take a look at what their processes look like, particularly in application security.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, with application security, and we do a lot of testing with applications and different products, oftentimes we ask the questions to product managers. It's like, okay, great, we're looking at your software dynamically or statically, we're testing, but the product has interrelationships with so many other internal network services, external APIs, and there's implicit trust there, right? There might be key stores that an application or software is basically relying on for signing different binaries, et cetera, right? In order to ensure the integrity of that software. Well, if the key store is compromised, but you don't look at that from a security perspective, then you're really limiting the scope. And this is the thing that a lot of companies and buyers of security services just simply don't understand. They're like, oh, okay, well, I need to do a, this really kind of goes out to the product software companies that are out there. They want assurance so that they can sell more of their software or products to the market, but they don't bother to look at the overall threat model that goes beyond the application. And that is such a missing component to most application threat models. We talked about organizational threat models, and now we're looking at application threat models. There's a lot of application threat models that simply don't look at the other dependencies around integrated IAM, integrated logging, integrated credential stores or digital certificate stores. And as a result, that provides a phenomenal way to undermine the overall security of the software because there's that implicit trust again. And so it's really important that companies begin to employ application threat modeling for software. If you're manufacturing software, manufacturing products, and look at what dependencies support the product. And at an organizational level, if you're consuming these types of hardware devices like SolarWinds in your environment, you got to be able to see, well, what is organizationally, are we another organization that there might be adversarial groups and threat actors that might use another medium in order to get in. SolarWinds is today, might be something else tomorrow, right? So what is that? And reviewing the implicit trust models at an organization of our processes and technology consumption is very, very important. I think that we're at the lowest rung of maturity for a lot of different reasons. I'll begin by saying that a lot of frameworks that are out there don't, like, when I say frameworks, I'm talking about control frameworks. You take your NIST, your 853, your CMMC, your FedRAMP, they do not have the adequate specificity to basically talk at a granular level on how to employ zero trust relationships in an organizational threat model. They just don't. They don't even reference what is an organizational threat model because everything is control family based. A great example of this is, like, I really poke fun of, after 25 years of being in ITIS, the predominant way to manage vendors in security is through the shared assessment program, and at least in the United States. And you give your vendors, your technology providers, death by questionnaire of like 1,000 questions. And usually the administration of the facilitation of that effort is done by, governance, risk, and compliance professionals that are just simply trying to go through the list of questions and get the tool to basically have a desirable outcome. Hackers and criminals know this process. And a lot of this stuff is advertised, and communicated as we share ideas in public forums and whatnot, much like this. And so they're taking notes. I would be taking notes if I was on the other side. I would be saying, okay, well, this is what these organizations are doing. Let me just go between the lines. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are broken in enterprise security programs, one of which is vendor risk assessments that are death by questionnaire, because they're really not looking at the threat context, the risk context of an organizational threat model. So that's my soapbox, and I'm getting off of it right now.
I think
Right.
another interesting aspect is, with the amount of publicity this has gotten, they're having to publicly tell people, like, this is what we've patched. These are the things that we've fixed, which basically tells people who are, in the seat of the criminal, like, okay, so this is what happened the first time. This is how they got in. This is what they did to fix it. All I have to do is go around those specific fixes. And this is basically an entire checklist of how I might be able to get in and replicate the same thing with somebody else. So I definitely think to the aspect of this is going to be replicated by other people, the amount of transparency, while it is fantastic for the community, is also like a huge detriment. And I definitely think that we're going to be seeing more in 2021 and in 2022, because they've already said that it's going to take a year to really like fish out what exactly happened, who all was affected, what they can do to mitigate it. So I'm just really interested to see how things are going to progress.
We have to walk a really fine line there. I agree with you that certainly gives them a place not to start, right? They know what not to do. But the truth of the matter is that information sharing, that intelligence sharing in many ways is core to a healthy infosec world, right? We're unable to really do what we do if that information flow doesn't happen. So it really is a catch-22 in some ways, for sure, because yeah, I mean, ideally that will be remediated and then you won't have to worry about those style of attacks. They'd have to find something new anyway, but confirming what they shouldn't try does shorten their life cycle for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree there. It is a fine line for sure. I think that, there has been some maturation and threat intel sharing over the past, 5-7 years, and much more is even needed. But I think that, I think in the future, there, as companies basically, like you look at what SolarWinds had in terms of their recommendations. They say, please whitelist our software using these root program directories off of, C:/program files, whatever. And they were basically saying whitelist those against your AV, or whitelist those against your endpoint protection or whatnot. And so that provides definitely some good notes, right? Because if I'm going to basically inject some level of malware into those file systems, I might go there as, as a basic, just simply, supposition there. But I think there's a fine line of, I think that level of information going in the future from product-based companies needs to be more judicious in terms of who gets that. Does it go on a public domain so that anybody gets it, even though those that don't actually buy your product? Maybe the future does hold that, you actually, maybe that goes into like an authenticated form where only customers basically have access to that customization information, because it actually is intel, right? It's intel for an adversary, a threat actor who actually wants to know, okay, where might I go in order to basically hide some of my custom malware, my custom exploit code, and things like that. So I think there's a good.
To your point, Tony, a lot of pure security vendors have gone to that model for their documentation, right? It's that gray space between configuration management and security that I think we're going to see a lot of exploitation in, because of exactly what you mentioned. Exactly.
This kind of information that they're spreading about their product of customization and how it was manufactured and things like that, that's intelligence for people to use against other organizations or whoever's using that tool. But at the same time, we got to look at ways to protect that information, or even if that information can be protected. Because at the end of the day, you can have someone sign an NDA with a purchase agreement, but that doesn't mean that information is going to stay solidly private.
Yeah,
So
yep.
Closed information exchange, is that what you propose here? I mean, I don't want to make it a closed community, but a secure one at least, or private one.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, is I don't think there's such thing as that in the threat intelligence community, because we're all very good at finding information we need, and people are very good about spilling secrets.
Yeah, you bring up a point, and I don't know if I'm hitting this, from the angle that you're trying to go, but there's wolves in sheep clothing on both sides of the fence, right? There's obviously federal agents and international cybersecurity agents that are infiltrating dark forums, chat groups, blah blah blah, in order to get intel, and vice versa, right? I mean, there are people that work in enterprises that are colluding with outside threat actors, and so it goes both ways. So I do think that, applying the need to know for any type of like configuration software data that could be useful from a broader threat perspective is needed. And it's right now, I think, highly immature in terms of a relationship model, right? Because how do you qualify that wolf in sheep's clothing, right? There could be a lot of profiling, there could be a lot of speculation, there could be a lot of false positives on, doing that. So, it's definitely a sensitive area, but I think that, architecturally, if you look at an organizational threat model, and one of the things that you do in threat modeling is you define an attack surface. So like when the SolarWinds, vulnerability hit, and there was an active exploits that were being done, and there's, IOCs being shared and whatnot. Obviously, you want to stay abreast of what those are, but you also, obviously you want to understand, is this product, and it could be something else in the future, is this product in my attack surface? There's a lot of organizations that simply don't know what their attack surface is. So if you take a look at the basics of what is threat modeling, it's a model of threats. You can't really understand how those threats are contextually applicable to you if you don't understand what you're defending in the first place, right? So if your IT sprawl is so vast, and you're from a software perspective, from a hardware perspective, from a vendor services perspective, and API calls, to third-party SaaS providers, then you don't really have a good understanding about how the supply chain risk could actually be material to you if you have a technology that is in your attack surface, and that could be a conduit, or a Trojan horse into your organization for either extortion as a threat motive, for persistence from a malware botnet objective, from a information disclosure, from a email user harvesting. There's so many different threat motives there. So I think that a major takeaway as we think about evolution of supply chain risk is like, do you understand your attack surface? Have you enumerated software hardware integrations, and begin to understand the criticality of those within the organization by maybe prevalence, by maybe the type of integration that it has within your overall corporate IT environment, or maybe your product environment. So I think those are things that there's some key takeaways that anyone listening out there from the enterprise can really walk away with, above and beyond some of the things that already Paul alluded to, which is more active defense now, egress, filtering, and analysis, right? Egress, blacklisting of different domains, IP subnets that are, known to be associated with threat actors, things like that, staying abreast of what IOCs are out there so that you can be informed in how to apply them into a defensive, posture. There's now defensive YARA rules that could be incorporated into different types of security products that are inline network or agent-based endpoint on a server, virtual or physical, or endpoint, computing platform. So there's a lot of simple active defensive things that can be done now in response to what happened with Sunburst. But beyond that, I think that it's timely that organizations in 2021 start to think about organizational threat model. What is their attack surface, from a general standpoint? But also, consider industry factors. Like, are you in fintech? Are you in healthcare? Are you in healthcare IT? Are you in information services? Are you in data analytics? Are you in cryptocurrency? Are you in the video gaming industry? Understanding what are the use cases and the technology stack that you have in your attack surface is going to help you understand better what your threat model is and how you can respond to when these types of threat advisories come out for the next Sunburst that happens.
Right. It makes more sense to take an individual look at this and manage it per company instead of trying to apply a band-aid to this situation and saying, just don't share information. It doesn't make sense to this community, and it doesn't make sense to prevent attacks. Again, it's just a band-aid. So looking at it from a threat-based model and applying it to your individual corporation makes more sense. What works for one company isn't going to work for your company.
One of the things here too, this is really where policy meets the road, right? Where the rubber meets the road for that. It's you're looking at mitigations that need to occur in an organization as far as their purchasing model. All software, for example, would need to be approved and go through the purchasing office. And before software is purchased by a company, that has to come back to IT to get evaluated and inventoried that it exists in the environment, right? So there are mitigations you can do on the policy side here that help quite a bit. It really comes back to inventory, inventory, inventory. And this is really the core of any security program in many ways. You have to know what you have. You have to know what your environment looks like to know what you've got to defend. So if you don't have that and you don't have the attack surface defined, you're probably waiting to get hit. It's kind of where it is. So getting that inventory together and dependable, and getting a process around determining anytime your attack surface changes in that inventory, whether it's an automated process or a policy of how you purchase new assets. Both those things are very important. They really feed into having the command and control over your attack surface to be able to defend it properly.
Yep, agreed. And the last thing I'll just simply address for those that are actually in the product, development business, hardware, software, is that oftentimes what sells products, it's features, right? We're not going to kid ourselves. Feature rich, great user experiences, easy to administer technology is what sells and what gets adoption. I mean, there's no mistake about that. In doing that, many companies basically forego the impact of the worst case scenario of a security misstep, right? And we see that today with Sunburst. So I think that it's a wake-up call for many product, hardware, software vendors to basically understand the ramifications of security as it relates to making a dent in brand, making a dent in contracts, renewable contracts, making a dent in stock price, right? If they're a public company, all of these things, for it, and not just simply picking security solutions or services just because it's a checkbox. Oh, we did a pen test. A pen test, can mean so many different things, and we that's a whole separate discussion, obviously. But I mean, it can be done in so many different ways. Some extremely poorly, and some extremely well. So it's really about understanding at the organizational threat model at the app for. Let me take it back. It's really understanding the application or product threat model, and making sure that security, not just of the software, but of the dependencies of that software with other integrated system network, cloud related services that are out there that support the product, that could be a conduit in order to undermine the security posture of that product is really important. And product engineering groups, product managers out there that are listening or that maybe are going to be forwarded this video, really would be wise to listen to that advice, because it does affect the business overall.
Yeah, I think we can all agree this is still a waiting game. This is still for us getting information and learning how to execute on that information. For people who are security leaders in your organizations, this is definitely time to evaluate. A lot of the times you already have your security plan for the following year. This is a really great time to reevaluate what you're going to be doing so that you can strengthen up your security posture going forward. For people within the community, this is still a time to educate clients, a time to become a student, a time to really sit back and think about how you can help the community with information, and then also protect your clients as well, knowing things that you do. We do have a lot of videos on threat modeling, specifically organizational threat modeling, as well as blog posts that you can go ahead and look up if you are looking for more information on how to do that for yourself or to engage one of us for help. And we would be happy to share that with you too. And some of those will be in the description for this video, so you can just quickly click over to there. But again, this is just a discussion between 4 people as it is, but this is a discussion for the entire community to be able to contribute to. So whether you're watching this on social media, whether you're watching this on YouTube, definitely continue the conversation in the comments and just let us know what information that you are taking away from the situation and what your opinion is on the right way to mitigate or execute or go from here. We would love to hear about it. So again, this has been another VERSPRITE Roundtable. Thank you all for tuning in, because we really appreciate having these kind of open, organic discussions in our community. A lot of times these are behind closed doors, and I think it's really important to have these more open so that we can kind of progress in the future. So like this video, share it with your friends, and please, please, please secure yourself going forward. Thank you guys, and we will see you next time. Bye.